Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. He returned from the brink of death only to find his land stolen, his home turned into a museum, and armed guards at his own gate. But Roy Millstone isn't backing down. This is Texas, and when you steal from a soldier, you'd better be ready for war. When I crossed the Texas state line in my dusty old Ford, the sun was barely up, and the sky was bleeding shades of orange and violet. I'd driven all night. Couldn't sleep much anyway. My right hip was aching from too long behind the wheel, but the thought of seeing Millstone Ridge again was enough to keep me wide-eyed. My land, my family's land, 320 acres of dry Comanche County dirt, pasture, sweat, and memory. I hadn't set foot on it in 4 years. Cancer treatment in Arizona took most of my strength, most of my savings, and damn near my will to keep fighting. But I'd made a deal with myself. If I came out of that hospital walking, I was coming back home, back to the ridge. I owed that to Mama and to Granddad, and to every Millstone whose bones were buried under that land since 1893. I passed familiar county signs and old storefronts with peeling paint, then finally turned onto the dusty road that led to my family's land. I expected to see the same rusted gate, the battered Millstone Ridge, private ranch, sign swinging crooked on a nail. Instead, I saw a fresh, polished metal gate with an electronic keypad and surveillance cameras bolted to trees on either side. And right in front of it, mounted like a warning, was a gleaming white and blue sign. Welcome to Cedar Flats HOA, private community, no trespassing. I pulled up slowly, window down, jaw set tight. I thought maybe I'd taken a wrong turn, but no. This was the road, my road. Same fence lines, same cedar posts. Only now there was a uniformed guard standing behind the gate, looking at me like I was some lost delivery driver. He walked up to my truck with a clipboard and a polite but robotic smile. "Sir, this is a private community. If you don't have a resident access code or visitor pass, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I am the resident," I said, voice low and steady. "This is my land." "Name?" "Roy Millstone. I was born in that house up the hill. My great-granddaddy laid the first plank of that barn in 1905. You see that stone right there by the gate?" I pointed to the limestone marker buried in weeds. "It says established 1893, Millstone family." "That ain't decoration. That's my family's blood." The guard glanced at the stone, then back at me. "Mr. Millstone, according to our records, this property is part of Cedar Flats. It was sold to Sunridge Holdings, LLC, about 8 years ago. You must be mistaken." "Mistaken my ass," I growled. "I've got the deed in a fireproof box. My name's been on that paper since 1984. He tapped his radio and murmured something I couldn't hear. Then, with a tighter smile, he said, "I'm going to have to ask you to turn around." I didn't move. "Call whoever you want. I'm not leaving my own damn land." The man looked uncomfortable now. "I'll have to notify the HOA board." "Do that. While you're at it, I'll be calling someone too." I backed up just enough to park off the road. Hands shaking, I pulled out my phone and called Loran. Loran McConnell had been managing the ranch since I left for treatment. He was a good man, son of the man who worked for my daddy, and as close to family as you could get without blood. He answered on the third ring. "Loran, I'm back in Texas," I said, "and there's a goddamn keypad gate at my own front road." There was silence on the line, then a heavy sigh. "Roy, I thought you sold it." I felt the air suck right out of my lungs. "The hell are you talking about?" 3 years ago, I got a formal letter. Said you'd appointed a proxy to terminate my management contract. Said the land was being transitioned to a new owner. Signature looked like yours. Came through legal channels. I even called the number on the notice. They said it was legit. I could hear the shame in his voice. "I swear to God, Roy, I never would have walked off that land if I thought for a second it was fake." My knuckles went white around the steering wheel. "You're telling me someone forged my name and pretended to be me?" "Looks that way," he said quietly. "I kept the paperwork. You should see it." I hung up and stared through the windshield. My land, my home, had been locked up, rebranded, and claimed by strangers while I was off fighting cancer. I sat there a long time watching the security camera blink red at me like an unblinking eye. It took every ounce of restraint I had not to drive straight through that shiny new gate. Instead, I turned the truck around, tires crunching on gravel, and headed for the Comanche County Courthouse. If someone had stolen my land on paper, then it was time to go dig up the paper trail. The Comanche County Courthouse hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been there. A squat limestone building with a creaky elevator and a smell of old paper and bad coffee. I walked in carrying a manila folder full of every scrap of property paperwork I'd ever saved. I'd been smart enough to bring copies. The originals were still in my fireproof box at a friend's house. The clerk behind the glass looked up at me like she'd seen a ghost. "Mr. Millstone, well, I'll be damned. Folks said you moved to Arizona for good." "I came back," I said. "Now somebody's telling me my ranch isn't mine anymore." Her face shifted from surprise to something like pity. "You'd better talk to records." She buzzed me through a side door, and 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a cramped office with a county records officer named Harold Dixon, a wiry man with spectacles perched low on his nose. He pulled up the property database on an ancient-looking monitor and typed my name. "Millstone Ridge Ranch," he murmured. 320 acres, north lot with house, barns, irrigation rights. Sold to Sunridge Holdings, LLC on June 12, 2015. "Bullshit," I said flatly. "I never sold it." Harold frowned. "According to this, you did. Here's the deed of transfer." He spun the monitor toward me. I stared at a scanned copy of a document that claimed to be my signature. Looped, jagged, and completely wrong. Whoever had forged it thought they were clever, but my middle initial was off, and they'd used an old address from when I was stationed at Fort Hood. The sale price made my stomach turn, $185,000 for land worth at least $4 million on a bad day. "You see that?" I jabbed a finger at the screen. "That's not my address. That's not even my handwriting. And the notary? You check his license." Harold clicked through to the notary info and whistled. "Well, now. This guy's license was revoked back in 2013. He shouldn't have notarized anything. Yet here we are," I muttered. He printed me copies of everything: the deed, the seller's affidavit, the payment record, even the plat map showing Millstone Ridge sliced into 17 neat little parcels. Each parcel had a little HOA logo in the corner. On the buyer line was the name Sunridge Holdings, LLC. I recognized the woman listed as the managing member from a recent news clip about some innovative agri-community on former ranch land. Catherine Katie Esben, president of Cedar Flats HOA. So they'd planned this. Turn my ranch into some boutique heritage housing development with a fake museum where my home stood, my family's name on a brochure. Authentic Texas ranch lifestyle, no doubt with artisan goat yoga and farm-to-table nonsense. I thanked Harold, stuffed the papers in my folder, and left. Outside on the courthouse steps, I called Loran again. "I've got the proof," I told him. "They forged my signature, used a dead notary, and bought the whole damn place for pennies. Sunridge Holdings belongs to that HOA president, Katie Esben." He swore under his breath. "Roy, that's a hell of a mess." "Yeah," I said. "And now I'm going to clean it up." I drove straight to the one man I knew would shoot straight with me, Caleb Norris, an old Army buddy who'd gone to law school after Panama and now practiced property law out of a 2-room office above a gun shop. Caleb met me at the door with a handshake that could still crush bone. "Jesus, Roy, you look like you've been through hell," he said. "Come on in." I laid out the papers on his desk. He read them quietly, jaw tightening. "This isn't just a bad deal," he said finally. "This is felony fraud, forged signature, revoked notary, underpriced sale, conflict of interest. They've built their whole development on a rotten foundation." "I want my land back," I said. "First, we freeze the situation," Caleb replied. "We file a LS pendens, a notice of pending litigation, so no one can sell or encumber the property while this is in dispute. Then we go after the deed in court." "Do it," I said. He nodded. "You're going to need evidence, more than just your word. Bank records, witnesses, handwriting experts." "I've got a lifetime of paper in storage," I said. "And Loran can testify. He's got the original letter they sent him to kick him off the ranch." Caleb leaned back. "We're also going to find out why they targeted you. This smells like a long game, Roy. Nobody forges a dead man's signature for a one-off." That line hit me harder than I expected, because he was right. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment hustle. Someone had been circling my land for years, waiting for a moment of weakness. I left his office with a signed retainer agreement and a head full of fury. The sun was setting when I got back in my truck. From the highway, I could see the ridge off in the distance, dotted now with fresh gravel roads and skeletons of new houses where my grazing fields used to be. My house sat alone on the hilltop like a hostage. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Hang on, old girl," I muttered to the ridge. "I'm coming for you." 2 days later, I came back to the gate. Only this time, I wasn't alone. Caleb rode shotgun, suit jacket off, tie loosened, eyes hidden behind mirrored aviators he hadn't taken off since the Gulf War. I had a copy of the Les Pendens in the glove box and a fresh set of court-stamped documents in the back seat. My palms were sweating, but my spine was straight. As we pulled up to the gate, the same guard from before emerged from the booth like a dog sniffing its own territory. He recognized me instantly. "Sir, I already told you." Caleb held up a finger. "Don't speak." He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a document, and slipped it into a clear folder. "This is a legal notice filed with the Comanche County Court. As of this morning, any activity regarding this property, including sale, construction, demolition, or occupancy, is subject to litigation. You're officially on notice." The guard squinted at it. "I'll have to call my supervisor." "You do that," Caleb said. The man walked off, mumbling into his radio. Meanwhile, I stared past the gate at my house. The same roof, same porch swing, same cedar posts. But the driveway was freshly graveled, and the mailbox now read, "Cedar Flats Museum, Historic Site, by appointment only." I wanted to rip it out of the ground. A second security vehicle pulled up behind the gate. Out came 2 men dressed in black uniforms. No badges, but guns on their hips, radios on their shoulders, and the swagger of folks who think rules are for other people. One of them, tall, bearded, leaned into Caleb's window. "Sir, you're trespassing on private property." "This man owns the property," Caleb said calmly. "Not according to our files." "I don't give a damn about your files," I snapped. "I was born in that house. You're interfering with a legally protected community. We have the authority to remove you." That's when I noticed something wrong. Their badges didn't say Comanche County or Sheriff. They said Cedar Flats Security. And their patches, stitched to look official, were knockoffs. No department seals, no legal jurisdiction. I hit record on my phone, held it up. "Say that again," I said. "Tell me you're law enforcement. Go ahead." They didn't. One of them turned away, talking into his mic. The other stood his ground. "You have 60 seconds to vacate the area or you'll be detained." Caleb leaned out his window. "You lay one hand on my client and you're going to jail for impersonating a law enforcement officer." The guy smirked. "You're not from around here, are you?" "I'm from the goddamn U.S. Army," Caleb said, and rolled up the window. I was already dialing. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered, "Sheriff Gene Wilcox." "Gene, it's Roy Millstone." "Roy, thought you were in Arizona." I was. Now I'm in front of my gate with 2 armed security guys pretending to be cops. They're threatening to detain me. Silence. Then a low growl. "Stay put. I'll be there in 20 minutes. 30 minutes later, a black and white county cruiser pulled up like Moses parting the Red Sea. Gene Wilcox stepped out, cowboy hat low, badge real, eyes narrowed. He took one look at the uniforms and barked, "Get your asses back behind the gate." "But Sheriff, this is—" I said, "Move." They did. He walked over to me, took off his hat, and offered his hand. "Damn good to see you, Roy. Wish it were under better circumstances. You okay?" I nodded. Caleb handed him the lease pendants. Gene looked it over, whistled. "So it's real." "Damn real," I said. Gene turned back to the security men. "Tell your bosses if they send one more rent-a-cop dressed like a deputy to threaten a legal landowner, I'll have them in lockup for impersonation and unlawful detention." He turned to the guard at the booth. "You tell your HOA president that this man's name is Roy Goddamn Millstone, and if I catch you blocking his access again, you'll be defending yourself in front of a jury." I wasn't sure whether to cheer or cry. Instead, I just shook Gene's hand again. Caleb and I drove off without trying to enter. For now, we'd made the point. We had the law behind us, and the clock was ticking. Every hour that passed made their case weaker and ours stronger. That night, I uploaded the phone footage to a private server, just in case. I hadn't decided if I'd go public yet, but I knew one thing. They'd tried to intimidate the wrong damn Texan. The next morning, I drove to Loran's place in Stephenville, an hour east of the ranch. He lived in a modest home tucked behind a feed store, his front yard littered with rusted tractor parts and empty sacks of seed. Same Loran as always, more machine grease than skin on his hands, and a permanent sunburn that made him look like he'd lost a fight with the sun. He met me at the truck with a long hug, something neither of us ever did until the war and cancer made men like us realize how little time we had. "You look like hell," he muttered. "Thanks," I said. "So do you." He brought out a cardboard banker's box from his garage. Inside, every paper, receipt, and letter tied to his management of Millstone Ridge. I kept everything, even that letter from whoever said you sold the place. The letter was on faux legal letterhead, signed with a crooked version of my name, using a mailing address I hadn't touched in 20 years. There were legalese phrases that made my blood boil: termination of management agreement, exclusive right of development transfer, community conversion clause. But what caught my eye was a reference line: Millstone Trust, Addendum 4. "What trust?" I asked. Lorraine frowned. "That's the thing. I never heard of any trust. I assumed you set one up for taxes or inheritance. That's why I didn't question it." I hadn't. Caleb cross-checked the document against the county archives and found something worse. There was a Millstone Trust registered, but it had been created in 2011. Not by me, not by my mother, but by someone named R. Dale Millstone. My stomach turned. Dale was my second cousin, died in a motorcycle crash in the year 2009. No kids, no wife. Nice enough guy, but not someone who'd ever had legal power over anything. They'd forged his involvement posthumously. Caleb's face went stone cold. They used a dead man to create a trust in your family's name. That trust sold the ranch to Sunridge Holdings, which means they fabricated an entire paper chain. How did they even get access to that name? Lauren cleared his throat. "You remember Katie Esbin's maiden name?" I blinked. "Esbin? No. Wait. She was a Millstone. Her mom was your daddy's sister. They moved to Austin when you were still in high school." My head spun. "You're saying Katie's my cousin?" "Second cousin. Barely. But legally, enough to fake consent through a family trust if no one checks too hard. Jesus, that's why it looked real. That's why the court system didn't question it. A distant relative with a shared name created the illusion of legitimacy, and because I was off the grid fighting cancer, no one challenged it. The more Caleb dug, the worse it got. We found that Sunridge Holdings had received federal and state grants for preservation and adaptive reuse of historic rural property. Grants totaling over $200,000 funneled through a nonprofit called the Southern Heritage Conservation Fund, a fund created by, you guessed it, Katie Esben. On paper, it looked noble, preserved the architectural history of rural Texas. In practice, it was a tax dodge. They'd funneled those funds into paving roads, hiring private guards, installing solar-powered gates, and paying for marketing brochures that used my family's name like a trademark. That same afternoon, I got a knock on the door of the motel I was staying in. It was a woman in her late 20s, jeans, button-up shirt, worn boots, journalist type. She introduced herself as Amy Blake from a small investigative outfit based in Dallas, said she was doing a long-term project on HOA abuse and fraudulent land claims in rural Texas. "I saw the video of the security guys trying to throw you off your land," she said. "You made quite a stir." I wasn't interested in becoming some kind of symbol, but Amy had already done her homework. She showed me a thick binder of printed emails, grant applications, and internal HOA memos leaked to her by a whistleblower on the Cedar Flats HOA board who didn't like where the money was going. In one of those memos, Katie wrote, "Millstone Ridge is central to the brand. As long as we keep the structure intact, the house itself can be leveraged for tax and cultural status. It doesn't matter if the old man ever comes back. He's out of the picture." Amy looked up at me. "Still want to stay quiet?" "No," I said. "Hell no." We spent the next few hours recording my story on camera. Everything from the original deed to the cancer diagnosis to the day I hit that gate and saw a stranger guarding my home. She promised to cross-reference everything and release a full exposé once she confirmed the legal trail. Later that night, I sat alone on the motel bed, staring at the ceiling. They'd faked documents, used my dead cousin's name, pulled in government money, and kept me off my own land by dangling a shiny plaque that said, "Historic Site." But now I had something they didn't. I had the truth, and a camera pointed in the right direction. I was back at Caleb's office the next morning when the knock came. Not a knock on the door like someone polite, but the kind of knock that says, "I brought a problem." And sure enough, in walked a man who looked like a lawyer's idea of a rancher. Polished boots, creased jeans, a blazer too clean for real work, and a smug expression he'd probably practiced in the mirror. He stuck out his hand like we were old pals. "Roy Millstone, I presume," he said. Thomas Millstone. We're cousins." I didn't shake his hand. Caleb gave me a quick look, and I could tell he didn't like this guy either. Thomas continued without missing a beat. "You probably don't remember me. I'm Dale's nephew from Abilene. My dad was Clyde Millstone." I did remember Clyde, barely. A drunk and a gambler who hadn't set foot on Millstone Ridge since the Nixon administration. His kid showing up now was like a bad check bouncing back after 20 years. "I heard about the whole mess with the HOA, Thomas said, casually taking the seat across from us. "Crazy stuff, but, well, I figured it was time to come forward. As part of the Millstone family, I have certain inheritance rights, especially since you've been absent for so long." "You can leave now," I said. He held up a hand, grinning like a man with a hidden ace. "Hear me out. I've been in touch with the Cedar Flats Board. They're willing to acknowledge my stake. There's a legal pathway here where we can settle this peacefully. You let the development proceed, keep the house as a landmark, and in return, I get my rightful share. We both walk away clean." "Share of what?" I growled. "Your daddy walked away from this land 50 years ago. You never touched a fence post here, but it's still family land. And under Texas intestate law," Caleb cut in. "Stop. Roy is the sole heir listed in the last notarized estate documents. Any claim you think you have would be secondary, and based on a chain of inheritance that doesn't apply unless Roy were dead." Which he's not. Thomas smiled at me again, all smooth and soulless. "Well, you weren't exactly alive to the county for a few years, were you? Arizona. No activity. No property tax payments made in person. It raised questions." I stood up so fast my chair fell backward. "You trying to tell me my cancer gave you squatter's rights?" No, he said, backing off slightly. "I'm just saying, things get murky when the only millstone anyone sees disappears. A lot can happen when a man's gone." Caleb moved between us, keeping a hand near his phone. I could feel the blood rising in my face, my teeth grinding. I'd expected to fight lawyers, developers, fake cops, but I hadn't counted on fighting my own damn name. Thomas stood, brushing off his blazer. "Look, I'm not your enemy. I just think you're being emotional. Let's be honest. This land, it's too much for one man. Why not let it evolve?" I didn't say a word. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking something. He left with a smirk, and Caleb locked the door behind him. Later that day, Amy Blake called. Her voice was low and serious. "We've got a leak inside HOA communications," she said. "Someone on the board forwarded me an email chain from 2 weeks ago. Katie Esbin and Thomas Millstone were coordinating before he ever came to see you. She read from the email. If he plays stubborn, we'll let the cousin apply pressure legally. It gives us a window to claim legitimacy and confuse the court with dual inheritance claims. Once we fragment his authority, we proceed with reclassification. They wanted to turn me into a question mark. That was the whole play. Not defeat me in court, but drown me in gray areas." It got worse. Thomas had already filed a petition for partial estate entitlement in district court, claiming that as a surviving blood relative, he had rights to the unallocated agricultural assets of the Millstone lineage. It was thin, legally, but it meant more delays, more court time, more confusion. Caleb filed a motion to dismiss it immediately, citing standing and will precedents. But we both knew this was about dragging things out, stalling tactics. I drove home that night, if you could call a one-room motel home, and found a manila envelope taped to my door. No return address. Inside was a black and white photocopy of a legal ledger. It was old, looked like something out of a bank vault. On the page was a signature, Clyde Millstone from 1972, formally renouncing any future claim to Millstone Ridge in exchange for a payout from my grandfather, $500 and 2 mules. At the bottom of the page, handwritten, he sold his future for 2 asses. Let's not let his son take it back. No note, no name. But I knew whoever sent it had been watching. And they were on my side. 3 days passed with silence from Thomas, which worried me more than his smug little monologue. When snakes go quiet, they're either planning something or dying. I was hoping for the latter. Then, out of nowhere, Caleb got a call. A short one. He hung up and looked at me with something close to confusion. "Thomas wants to meet," he said. "Privately. He says it's important." I didn't trust that as far as I could throw his expensive boots, but Caleb insisted we go. Neutral ground, the back room of a barbecue joint in Cisco. Public enough to be safe, private enough for dirty truths. Thomas was already there when we arrived. No blazer this time, just a button-down and worn jeans. He looked tired. That polished confidence had cracked. He gestured for us to sit, didn't say a word until we had. "I screwed up," he said, eyes low. "They used me." Caleb arched an eyebrow. "You don't say." Thomas slid a thick envelope across the table. "These are the emails between me and Katie, between her and the HOA board. I saved everything. I've already sent a copy to the state attorney's office." I stared at him. Why the change of heart? He let out a bitter laugh. "Because I saw the endgame. She wasn't going to give me anything. Hell, I wouldn't even get a plaque. She said I'd be an appreciated supporter once the land was fully reclassified. Then she stopped replying altogether." He looked at me, and for the first time, there was no smirk. I thought I was reclaiming something. I thought I had a right, but they weren't after justice. They were after money, and I was the idiot who gave them cover. Inside the envelope were printouts of internal memos, diagrams of proposed land use, and drafts of press releases. One read, "Pending successful quiet title action, original structure to be repurposed as a branded guest experience. Any remaining millstone involvement to be limited to photo opportunities or historical references." I had to read that twice. Branded guest experience. They wanted to turn my home into a theme attraction. And there, in the margin, Katie's notes, "Remove porch swing. It looks too rustic." Thomas slid one more document toward us. A floor plan, stamped confidential, showing the interior of my house, labeled Phase 2 remodel. They'd planned to gut the walls, rip out the wood stove, install polished concrete floors. A faux ranch Airbnb for tech tourists with money and no soul. Caleb looked like he wanted to punch something. "You're testifying," he said. Thomas nodded. "Already filed a sworn statement, but there's more. I've got access to HOA's internal file server, their bylaws, meeting recordings, membership lists. There's something you need to see." 2 hours later, we were back at Caleb's office, laptop open. Thomas navigated to a folder marked Conversion Files and opened a spreadsheet labeled Absorption Targets. My blood turned to ice. Millstone Ridge wasn't the only one. There were 11 other rural properties, all surrounding the Cedar Flat zone, marked by year. 2022, Keller Ranch, pending sale via proxy. 2023, Harper Land, aging owner, delayed lien strategy. 2024, Millstone Ridge, complete. Next to some names were the words, "Refused legal action, intimidation not advised." "In litigation." "In progress." It wasn't just a land grab. It was a systematic expansion plan built on fraud, elder pressure, inheritance confusion, and legal loopholes. The worst part? Some of those names I recognized. The Harpers were an older couple. The Kellers, a veteran family. People who wouldn't fight back. People who probably thought signing partnership papers was just formality. I felt sick. "Roy," Caleb said, "this goes beyond your case. This is organized." Amy Blake met us the next morning. We showed her everything. She spent 2 hours reviewing files, barely speaking. Then she closed the laptop and said, "I'm putting this on blast. National story. Multiple victims. Systemic abuse by a fake association operating under the guise of preservation." "You think people will care?" I asked. "They will when they see who funded it," she said, pointing to one of the grant documents. The Southern Heritage Conservation Fund received matching donations from senators' PACs and real estate lobbyists. This is dirty money running through patriotic wrapping paper. I knew then that this wasn't just my fight anymore, but it started with me, and I'd see it through. Thomas gave me one last envelope before we parted ways. "What's this?" I asked. "Original survey map. Your grandfather's copy, dated 1935. Proves the western fence line was never officially transferred, even though Cedar Flats claimed it was public easement." might help. Inside, folded like an old quilt, was a brittle piece of parchment with my family's past drawn in ink and sweat. I looked at Thomas. "You trying to buy redemption?" "No," he said. "Just trying to stop being the villain." We filed the lawsuit 2 days later. The claim was 79 pages long, not counting attachments. Fraud, forged deed, invalid notary, illegal HOA formation, abuse of public funds, and injunctive relief demanding immediate cessation of any development on Millstone Ridge. Caleb submitted it with the precision of a sniper. No emotion, just truth on paper, heavy and undeniable. The judge, a woman named Helen Stroud, didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, she granted an emergency injunction against Sunridge Holdings. All construction halted, all showings canceled, all HOA activity suspended pending court review. It was a small victory, but we all knew it was just the first domino. Katie Esben tried to go on the offensive. That same week, I was served with a countersuit by Cedar Flats HOA and Sunridge Holdings, claiming intentional disruption of community development, public defamation, and trespassing with intent to interfere. The last one made me laugh out loud. I interfered with my own front porch. Amy's story dropped the next morning. Full feature. Online, syndicated, and quickly viral. Headline: HOA from Hell, How a Fake Preservation Board Stole a Veteran's Family Ranch. There were photos of me as a young soldier, about my mother on the porch in 1997, side-by-sides of the house before and after the HOA installed surveillance cameras and renamed it Cedar Flats Museum, and audio clips. Thomas reading Katie's emails, even a leaked voicemail where she called me a stubborn hillbilly with no vision. Public opinion turned fast. Comments flooded in, some angry, some supportive, many shocked at how easy it had been to fake ownership. People started sharing their own HOA horror stories. Amy set up a whistleblower tip line. Within 72 hours, she had received nearly 400 messages from across the country. My phone rang off the hook. News stations, veterans groups, even a constitutional law professor who offered to testify pro bono. But not all attention was welcome. One night, I came back to the motel and found my room ransacked. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, just rearranged. My clothes tossed, my folders flipped through, my files scattered. It was a message. They couldn't win in court, so they'd try to rattle me, make me doubt, make me paranoid. They didn't know I'd seen worse. I'd slept under fire in the jungle, pissed in sandstorms, watched grown men cry in hospital beds. You don't shake a man who's already faced death. You just make him louder. That's when I went online. First video. This is my land. Just me on camera sitting under an oak tree with the Millstone Ridge sign behind me. No script, just the truth. I told the story from the beginning. Cancer, betrayal, gates, forged papers, and the fight. It wasn't polished. My voice cracked once or twice, but I spoke from the gut. By the next morning, it had 200,000 views, then 500. Then national media picked it up. Suddenly, I wasn't just Roy Millstone. I was the Roy Millstone, the face of rural resistance. Property rights groups reached out. Former sheriffs, retired judges, even small-town mayors. One guy mailed me a copy of his HOA's bylaws with the note, "How do we burn this thing down?" Meanwhile, in court, our evidence mounted. Thomas took the stand in a preliminary hearing and confirmed everything, showed the emails, described the manipulation, explained the chain of deceit from Dale's forged identity to the creation of the fake trust. Even Judge Stroud looked stunned. The real kicker came when Amy obtained internal grant applications from the Southern Heritage Conservation Fund. They weren't just shady, they were criminal. Dates didn't match. Signatures were auto-generated. Some fund recipients didn't even exist. Ghost nonprofits with no staff, no office, just P.O. boxes in Austin and Frisco. At that point, the Texas State Attorney General opened a formal investigation. Katie Esben was subpoenaed. Sunridge Holdings financials were frozen. And the final blow. Caleb uncovered that the HOA itself, Cedar Flats, had never been properly certified as a legal homeowners association under Texas Property Code, Chapter 209. They'd faked the charter using signatures from people who didn't own property in the district at the time. In legal terms, the HOA didn't just act illegally, it never legally existed at all. All this came out in court filings, one bullet point after another, each more damning than the last. By the time the pre-trial hearing ended, the courtroom was so silent you could hear paper shuffle. I sat there, fists clenched on the worn oak bench, listening as Caleb read the last lines aloud. The plaintiff demands the immediate reversal of all fraudulent transfers, full dissolution of the defendant entities, and the return of Millstone Ridge to its rightful owner. When we walked out of that courthouse, I didn't smile. Not yet. But I knew the tide had turned. They built their empire on paper lies, and now those lies were burning. The courtroom was packed the day of the final ruling, not just with lawyers and clerks, but neighbors, journalists, veterans, even a few ranchers who'd driven in from 2 counties over. The courthouse smelled like floor wax, coffee, and tension. I'd put on my old army dress jacket for the first time in years. It was tight around the shoulders, but it felt right. Judge Stroud walked in, robe sharp, eyes steady. She didn't waste time. Her voice was clear, crisp, and without mercy. The court finds that the deed transfer in 2015 was fraudulently executed using forged documents, invalid notary certification, and the unauthorized use of a deceased individual's identity. She flipped a page. The entity known as Cedar Flats HOA was never validly formed under Texas law and is hereby ordered dissolved. All assets acquired under its operation, including those of Sunridge Holdings LLC, shall be subject to seizure pending federal investigation. I stared straight ahead, hands still, jaw tight. She looked at me. Ownership of the property known as Millstone Ridge is to be restored to Roy D. Millstone, effective immediately. The court further orders the removal of all unauthorized structures, signage, and easements from said property within 60 days. Applause wasn't allowed in court, but people clapped anyway. Judge Stroud didn't stop them. Katie Esben wasn't there. She'd been arrested 2 days earlier, booked for wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, and abuse of public funds. Her mugshot had already gone viral. Even her smile looked entitled. Her lawyer tried to plea for leniency, citing misunderstood intentions. The judge didn't buy it. 14 years federal. The fake notary got 6. Sunridge Holdings' business license was revoked. The IRS opened a case. And those 17 half-built houses? The county condemned them. A few were torn down. The rest stood like skeletons, a failed monument to greed. Thomas stood beside me at the courthouse steps. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, not once, but he didn't need to. He'd flipped the game when it counted, and in Texas, that means something. "You going to rebuild?" he asked. "Better," I said. 2 months later, I took down the old no trespassing sign and replaced it with a hand-carved board. "Welcome to Millstone Ridge, Independent Land Center." What started as a revenge story turned into something else. We converted the North Barn into a legal resource hub for rural landowners. Caleb helped draft the first training program. Amy donated media coverage and set up an online portal. Thomas donated land he'd inherited near Abilene for a second site. Every Friday, folks came from all over the state to hear me speak. I called it How to Keep What's Yours. We covered deeds, probate, HOA loopholes, fraud spotting, everything they never teach you until it's too late. I even walked people through my own case, paper by paper, trap by trap. The videos went viral again. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the playbook. Some politicians hated it, said I was undermining established processes. Good. By the end of the year, 6 HOAs across Texas had been sued, 3 dissolved, and a bill introduced in the legislature to create a rural property rights task force. I testified in Austin wearing the same jacket I'd worn in court. I stood in front of a panel of men who'd never dirtied their boots and said, "This isn't about regulations, it's about respect. You don't get to use paperwork to steal a man's legacy." They didn't applaud, but the cameras caught it, and the country heard. Millstone Ridge is quiet now. The porch swing still creaks. The fields are green again. The cameras are gone, the gates unlocked. On the 130th anniversary of the ranch, I held a small ceremony. Just family, friends, and a few neighbors who'd stood with me through it all. We unveiled a new stone marker near the gate, a fresh carving beside the old one. Established 1893, survived drought, war, fire, and HOA. Still here. Someone asked me if I thought we'd seen the last of it. The fraud, the takings, the quiet thefts in the name of community. I looked out at my land and said, no. Then I smiled. But now they'll have to go through me first.